Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everyone, it's Foxx from modelmaking.guru here. Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Achilles Ridgerunner Borderlands painting project, in which I'll be showing you how I've got to this point in the painting order. Before I get going though, do allow me to quickly shout out the companies that help support this channel and keep it going. emodels.co.uk are my channel sponsors, and they're your one-stop shop for all your traditional model making needs. They're super friendly and offer permanent discounts off RRP on all your orders. Use the link below this video to get to the UK's largest online hobby retailer and start placing your orders. The channel is also supported by Goblin Gaming, who offer everything you need for your tabletop gaming habits and who stock all the Games Workshop tools and paints and equipment that I've used in this video at a massive 20% off recommended retail price. Use the Goblin Games affiliate link in the description below this video, and not only will you save up to 20% off your order, you'll also help me make a little bit of income because it's an affiliate link and I make a little tiny bit of scratch every time you place an order using that link. Anyway, enough waffle, let's crack on. How did I get to this point? Let me reveal all. Hello and welcome to a little one, maybe two-part video painting series where I'm going to be painting the Games Workshop Warhammer 40K. Oh, I've forgotten the name again. I keep wanting to call it the Matalan Ridge Racer because I made a joke and now it's stuck. It's what's it called? It's the Achilles Ridgerunner. That's it, the Achilles Ridgerunner. I think I've thrown the box away now. It's a wonderful little vehicle kit from 40K from Games Workshop. It's beautiful. I love this kit. We're going to be painting that. Whoa, sudden jump cut, everything moved. Yeah, there's nothing worse than filming a long segment and then having to film it again and realising you've moved everything from the last cut. Yeah, awesome. And so just ignore it, don't look behind the curtain. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Yeah, so anyway, what are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to be working on this. Now, if you've been paying attention to my other informational outlet type areas like the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Instagrams and the websites and other places, you will know that I'm in the middle of filming a video build for my patrons of the Master Grade Sazabi from Bandai. It's a Patreon exclusive series, so if you are a patron, you'll have been hopefully watching it. If you're not a patron, you won't have seen it, but if you become a patron, you can watch it. Like and subscribe. It's going to have a very specific paint job. I'm hoping to be able to paint the Sazabi with a Borderlands-style paint job. Now, if you know your video games, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but if you don't know, just pause this video now and just go and do a Google search for Borderlands or Borderlands art or Borderlands-style or just Borderlands. It's an awesome video game and it has a very distinct style. It's not cel-shaded, it's kind of more like old style, old school comic book art. Like an artist would sit and he would draw the comic book page with watercolours and inks and brushes and nibs before all the computer nonsense. I used to do it myself, watercolours and pencils and inks and everything. It was great fun. It's that kind of style. The colouring, and there's weathering and there's chipping and there's dirt and degradation and everything else. And then there's the ink outline layer on top. Not like cel-shaded, which is maybe one or two colours, everything's nice and clean, and it's got an outline. That's your Gunpla style cel shading. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about somebody painting an animated cell. Literally, watercolour and ink is that kind of feel. So that's what I'm going to do on the Sazabi. But before I try doing that on this very expensive Sazabi kit, I want to try a road test and try it on a test pig. And I figured, why not do it on this? I've been wanting one of these for a while. It kind of looks like a Bandit Technical from Borderlands 2, which is pretty cool. It's about as close as you're going to get to a Borderlands model kit. I have tweaked around a couple of the Genestealer dudes. He's just a bog standard Genestealer dude. This guy, I stuck a Tempestus Scion helmet on. This is a woman actually, but I stuck a Tempestus Scion helmet on her head, on her neck, scraped off the insignia on the back, and it looks more like a kind of bandity type of thing now. So I wanted to go for that Borderlands bandit look. It's not going to be a Genestealer vehicle. I'm not painting it to be played. This is being painted for fun. So we're going to test it out. Now, to that end, I have bought some specific products. Okay, so the first thing I picked up was some Dr. Martens, since 1934, Black Star Waterproof India Ink Matte, manufactured by Salis International Ink, Oceanside, California, 92056. Now, I don't know why I had to read all that out. It just seemed fun. Anyway, I got carried away. Yes, this is proper artist's India ink. Now, if you're wondering why I've gone for India ink and not just black paint, Abaddon Black or some of the Vallejo Game inks or something like that, very specifically, I've gone for India ink because India ink has approximately a billion times more blackness than paint and other inks. Artists' India ink is massively heavily pigmented. It's really bold, so it's very opaque. It's not very transparent. You want your, whatever you're doing the outlines, to be a very thin, easily flowing liquid. So you could use, for example, the Vallejo game inks, but even they aren't quite as dense as proper India ink, which is basically made of black holes ground up into a fine powder at the molecule size and then placed into a liquid suspension, which tastes terrible but is really dark. Just my experience of painting with this stuff and drawing many years ago, this is as dark as you get. So I've got myself, any India ink will do. You don't have to get Dr. Martins, you don't have to get that, but I had a look on Amazon. I do recommend things like this maybe, or the Winsor & Newton or the Daler Rowney. They are two of the best ones. Unfortunately, the only one I could find at the time was this one, and it is also matte, which is handy. Inks can often be a little bit glossy. It doesn't really matter, but it just makes life easier if it's matte. You could use paint, but if you thin paint down to the point where you can use it like an ink, it's going to be really transparent, so you're going to have to do it multiple times, and that's not what you want when you're trying to do cross-hatching and outlining. So we have ourselves some Dr. Martins India ink. Also, yes, the other thing I'm going to be trying out in this build as well is I have ventured into the contrast paint range. Yes, I know, before everybody starts wailing and gnashing of teeth, I've got into the contrast paint range for a very specific reason. I was studying all the sort of images and screenshots I could find of things like the Bandit Technical and other mechanical things from the Borderlands universe, and I very quickly realised there's no real metal or metallics in Borderlands. There's no shiny metal things. They're just all kind of greys. Even like car parts, like the bumpers and suspension and things like that, they're not made to look like shiny metal. They're actually painted in shades of grey just to look grey. There's no shiny thing. I mean, you get some shiny weapons and stuff and textures, but there's nothing that's actually bare metal, no simulation of bare metal. So I thought, why would I then paint all these things like the checker plate there and metal bits? Why would I paint them lead belcher and then do lots of shading and stuff on them? Why am I painting them to look like metals when that doesn't happen in Borderlands? So I'm going to try and simulate the Borderlands way of doing metallic and metal parts, which is basically greys. So I've got myself some contrast Griff Charger grey and some Space Wolves grey. I also got myself some of the contrast medium, which is the medium for the contrast paints. I did also get some more Larmian medium, which now comes in a massive bottle, yes. And I also got, I can't get it on camera, but I got some of the Rattlecan Grey Seer, which is one of the contrast primers, and also a small bottle of the Grey Seer. Now, you don't have to use the contrast primers, Grey Seer and Wraithbone, to use contrast paints. It just happens that it's a really nice colour, and it's kind of the colour I was looking for, and it's really fine. The difference between these primers and the regular Citadel primers is they're a bit smoother, they're much more fine grained, and they've got a bit less, the surface tension is a bit different, so it can work differently for the contrast paints, but it doesn't actually matter. You could use Tamiya grey primer, you could use any primer. I'm using that one because it's a nice kind of not too cold but not too warm grey colour. Tamiya Rattlecan primer would work just as fine. I just wanted to try it out, so I thought I may as well give it a go. And these will give me some nice greys and blues. The medium is for thinning and diluting these a bit, so I can maybe not make them quite so bold. I can build up the colour changes a little bit. And that's my plan. I don't know how it'll come out, but we'll try. So we've got a couple of these greys, and I might try other colours as well. So we're not going to go for any metallics, we're going to go for greys. And I might give it a try some metallics on the weapons, just for the sake of it, but I don't know yet. So that is what I picked up, all these new contrasty paints and the inks. So I'm going to get everything ready and we'll start off with the painting. Okie dokie, so we're going to start with one of my favourite colours, Avalanche Sunset, a nice dense warm yellow colour. It's on my wet palette here. Now if you don't know what a wet palette is and why you should really be using one, have a look in the top right there, little things just popped up. That's a video you want to watch, what a wet palette is and why you should make one. So we're going to go in and get the paint on here. Now, if you watch me apply this, it's going on as a nice, thin, smooth coat. When you get paint on, especially your first coat, you don't want to get brush marks everywhere, so you don't want to be overloading the brush. You don't want to be taking paint straight from the pot, it's too gloopy. And when you do get paint on the model, just take your time and move it around and flatten it out as you go along. Don't brush backwards and forwards because that rucks up the paint surface. But just work it, smooth it down, flatten it down. When I'm taking paint off the wet palette, I'm not just diving into the middle of the splodge of paint. I'm going from the outskirts of the paint on the palette. And I'm also not adding any water to it. There should be just enough paint in the wet palette to make the paint about the right thinness for painting. So go for the smoothest coat you can, go slowly, move paint around and flatten it out. And the first coat will be a bit transparent, a bit translucent. Don't panic, wait till it's fully dried and do a second coat. Smooth and slow. It's almost rude, that. Okay, so now we've got 2 coats down of the Avalanche Sunset and it's looking fantabulous. I do like that colour, it's very edible looking. Now the next step is for me to do some shading, and I don't mean shading like applying a shade to go into the recesses. I don't mean Games Workshop style. I mean reproducing airbrush pre-shading, but as a post-shading effect and brush painted, not airbrushed. If you know about airbrush pre-shading, what you would do is you would get your primer down, you would paint some black lines where you want the shadows to be, and then you'd airbrush over with your base colour like the Avalanche Sunset, and you'd leave it a bit transparent so you can see the shadowy black lines through the paint and you get a shaded panel effect. We didn't do that, we're not using an airbrush. So the first step in my post-shading is to do a shade, and by shade I mean a Citadel shade. This is Agrax Earth Shade. Now this is designed just to run into recesses, but I'm not really bothered about that. What I need it to do is just basically darken down the surface, and if it's patchy, that's fine. I want it to look uneven because we're going to do a weathered paint job. So this is really just to darken the base colour down. Now if you're doing this, or if you're following along, simple trick with a shade like this is don't be delicate, fill the brush up, get it on the model. Simple as that. The one thing you want to avoid is it pooling up anywhere, because it will dry as big blobs, big bulbous sort of blobs of shade of paint if you leave it to pool up, if it runs down through gravity. So basically fill up the brush, get it on there, and then just move it around so it goes into all the recesses, it colours the flat areas, but it's not pooling up anywhere. Don't think about it, don't plan it, just get it on. And once the Agrax Earthshade is on, you can see the effect I'm going for. Don't care that it's patchy, don't care that it looks a bit weird, but it's not pulled up anywhere. It's got lots of dark areas, there's still some light areas. It looks nice and natural and random. If you wanted it even darker, you could go for another coat of Agrax Earthshade, or you could try a different colour shade. I'm also not bothered that I've got it on the primer areas, because we can touch those up later. For now though, the next step is to go back in the pre-shading or post-shading with Avalanche Sunset again. This is the colour we painted a bit ago, but this time we're going to dry brush it. So we're dry brushing, you've seen me do it a billion times. You get a small amount of paint on the brush. This is a small base brush. You get most of it off on the piece of tissue. Your kitchen tissue will be, in fact, kitchen tissue is better than toilet paper. Toilet paper is a bit fluffy and, it comes off everywhere. And all we're going to do is we're going to dry brush this back onto the panelling, but we're going to make sure that we don't lose all that beautiful Agrax Earthshade coloration that we've spent a lot of time building up. We really want to make highlights and keep the shading in not just the recesses, but around the recesses. And the way to do this and to do it smoothly is to use a small brush like this and just use small circular motions. Now, you'll have to reload the brush a lot, as you'll see. That's fine, doesn't matter. But the big trick here is the circular motions. There's 2 types of dry brushing. There's the flicky back and forth with the brush, which just picks out edges, and that's really just for an edge highlight dry brush. Or there's this kind of thing where you want soft blended edges, soft fades from the dark areas to the light, and that's what we're looking for here. That's why you want to use this little small, say, base brush. These base brushes are great. Don't use a brand new one. If you've got some base brushes, some of the Games Workshop ones, once they get a bit old and misshapen, keep them. They make brilliant dry brushes just for this. For an edge dry brush, you want a big flat brush, but for this, where you want to bring out the highlights, these are perfect. And we're just going to work around some of the centres of panels and areas where I want there to be a lighter colour. Again, we need to make sure we're preserving not just the shade in the recess, but also some of the darker patches, because we want it to look variated. We want it to look uneven. We want some light areas and some dark areas. If we just did over the whole surface with this dry brush, we may as well have just done a recess shade. The whole point here is to have some dark areas and some light areas. So don't go crazy and blend in the yellow and the dark areas together as well. Take your time, it'll take you a while, but it's more than worth it. Okay, next up we're going to go in with some Uriel Yellow. Wow, I really can't say that. Uriel Yellow. It's one of my least favourite colours because it's so transparent. Well, it's one of my least favourite colours to brush because it's dead thin, it's horrible. It takes a million coats to get a solid yellow colour. But as a dry brush, it's fantastic. The plan here is basically to go back over the bits that we dry brushed with the Avalanche Sunset, but focus in a little bit on the centre of those panels, and in some areas, you know, just avoid them altogether. So some areas it's just the Avalanche Sunset, but some areas go over that again, but just towards the centre of those panels, of those patches. We're building up a highlight, and with each lighter coat, the area we dry brush will get smaller and smaller. We're doing exactly the same technique, little tiny circular motions, very, very light. I forgot to mention, I'm putting on no pressure here at all, and you can see hopefully how this colour is slightly changing. Now the Uriel Yellow is a much brighter yellow than the Avalanche, so it's really starting to make the colour pop. You can see there those two little sort of straight bits on the bonnet, I suppose you want to call them. Don't know what they are. They're still the kind of muddy brown Agrax colour, even though they've been dry brushed. But this now is really starting to make it pop and come alive because it's transparent. It's a pig to paint with, but it's an absolute brilliant colour to dry brush with. Once that's done, it's time to go in with Phalanx Yellow, which is an even brighter yellow, and it's going to be exactly the same. We're going to go in with the same dry brush, same technique, little circular motions, and we're going to focus on even smaller areas towards the centre of the highlight parts that we've painted here. You can see here how you've got light blending into dark, and now we're just focusing even more on the centre of panels. Again, I'm going to be varying it across different panels. Some will have big bright areas, some will have none at all, and we'll just see how it comes out. I'm going to work my way around. Now do keep in mind, one of the reasons a lot of people avoid dry brushing is because they think it gives a really crappy paint texture. Up until this point, the first two coats that we dry brushed looked baby but smooth. They looked fantastic. This coat started to see a little bit of grain coming, a little bit of graininess to the paint job. Nothing major, nothing that you would see on the tabletop. And once all the weathering goes on top of this and everything else we've got yet to do, you're not going to notice it, but it was there. And if I'd done lots more coats of dry brushing, it would have got worse and worse. If you're old enough to remember music cassettes, it's like you copy a cassette and then you copy that copy and then you copy that copy, and each time you make a new copy from a copy, you're adding background noise and it gets worse and worse and worse. Same with dry brushing. Do 1 or 2 coats, it's probably going to look great. If you do 3 or 4 coats, each coat you add will get more and more grainy. So keep that in mind. Try and not do a lot of dry brushing. Don't do coat after coat after coat. Stick to 2, maybe 3 at the most, and you should be all right. But again, tabletop distance, this will look absolutely fine. And once it's weathered, you won't even notice it. The next step was very straightforward, and that was just to go back over the areas where we dry brush yellow onto the primed parts with more primer. If you remember, we rattle canned it with Grey Seer. There is actually a pot version of Grey Seer available, which is pretty much exactly the same colour. Now what comes in the can is a lacquer primer. What comes out of the pot, I don't know. It's listed as a base paint, but it smells like a bit of a lacquer paint, so I don't really know. But all I care about is it's pretty much the same colour. So I'm just going around touching up any areas that have got coloured in yellow that need to be the grey primer. And the reason I've kept these as primer is because these are going to have a contrast paints later on, and contrast paints are transparent and need a primer to be visible through them. So I need to get these bits cleaned up, then we can crack on with the next step. Next up we have some red details to paint. For this I'm starting off just with the base coat of Mephiston Red. Now keep in mind, all the yellow stuff we've done, that's just a base yellow colour. We're not going to do that same process for all the other coloured parts. We'll do all those when we do all the shades and other bits later on. So for the rest of the vehicle it's going to be flat base coats from now. So this is Mephiston Red for the jerry cans. We've got the sort of what looks like a boiler or fire extinguisher or something on the side, and some other little cables here and there. We'll paint them all as red. So for the moment they're just getting the base coat of Mephiston Red, one of my favourite colours. I love it. Lovely, lovely colour. Lovely, lovely, lovely colour. It is. I'll stop. Next thing along, I need to get the windscreen painted, and for this I'm using Macragge Blue. Now it's only a very thin sliver of windscreen on this, but my plan is I'm going to use a technique that's been long used in comic books for decades, and that is to paint it blue and then use black to get this kind of... It's often used for leather, but it just works for any kind of glass or glossy or shiny surface. A dark blue colour and black lines. No idea how it's going to come out when I've finished, but we'll see how it goes. So just Macragge Blue on this little sliver of a windscreen. Also, how can you drive with such a tiny windscreen? Now I have to be honest, I don't quite know why I did this step now, but I thought, I know, I'll paint the tyres. I'm painting them with Skaven Blight Dinge, which aside from being an awesome name, is also a great colour if you're looking to reproduce sort of World War II European theatre German armour. Sort of, it's almost German grey, not quite, it's got a hint of German grey to it, but it's a good base colour. But yes, I didn't actually need to do this bit. As you'll see later on, while I'm handling the model and, you know, painting other bits, some of this paint actually comes off because they're acrylic paints and they're not super durable, and on the tyres they get the most wear and tear while I'm handling the model. So my plan, I don't know why I painted them now, because my plan is to just come back to the tyres once everything else is painted and weathered and it's all mounted onto the base. I'll come back and paint them because I'll be covering them in dirt and dust and mud and all kinds of things, and they don't need to be painted till then. So I don't know why I did this bit now, but I did. So I don't plan these things. I don't know how I work. Okay, next up is an experimental step for me. It's paint chipping time, but I'm not going to be doing my usual routine. Now, if you've seen me work before, you know that I tend to do a two-step chipping process when I'm doing brush painted chipping. I love brush painting chipping. What I tend to do is take a colour that's the same but lighter than the base colour of the model. So if it's a blue model, I take a much lighter blue than the base colour, and I paint chips all over it. And then I take a completely unrelated colour like a dark grey or a black or metallic, and I paint inside the middle of those light coloured chips that I've just painted. And that gives the impression of the normal paint of the vehicle or the object, then a little bit of lighter colour where fresh paint has been exposed and has never been weathered before, and then you get the metal or the primer underneath. That's how I normally do chipping. I'm sort of doing that here, but not quite. There will be a second colour to come on after this light yellow. This is Dawn Yellow. It's a very light, pale pastel yellow. There will be another colour to come to go into the middle of some of these, but not all of them, because I'm not just painting chips here. I want to paint chips and at the same time do some bleached, patchy areas on the paint job where there are lighter patches, but not like dry brushing. So what I've done, I've taken the Dawn Yellow, which is a very thin paint anyway. I've added a ton of extra water to it on the wet palette, so it's really like almost like a wash. I'm putting it on in drops. I'm just almost placing it onto the surface, and then every now and then I'll just load up, once I've painted some on the surface, I'll just load up the brush with water and smush it about and blend it. Now what it's going to result in is a kind of something you'd normally try and avoid, which is watermarks. I want to get some chip effects that I can fill in later on, but I also want to get some sort of watermarky stains and tide marks, just to suggest where paint's faded and sort of bleached away in the sun. It makes no sense when I actually explain it, but you'll see how it comes out. As promised, it's time for the next step of chipping, and for this I've gone back to Skaven Blight Dinge. It's a good neutral dark grey colour which works perfectly under the yellow. You've got to think about the colour you use for your main chip colour. It's got to work with the base colour. If you do, say, a rust colour on a red vehicle, it's not going to stand out as much as, say, a rust colour on a yellow vehicle. So you've got to consider what colour you use for your chip and how it's going to stand out and how it's going to look. And this grey colour, it's a nice neutral colour. It works for most base colours, and it's not necessarily rusty. Maybe it looks like some kind of space alloy or something like that. Now, like I said, I'm not focusing this in the centre of all the light patches. It will be in the middle of some of them, but for the majority, they'll just be out and about on edges and sort of corners where paint would chip off, just to suggest that paint has chipped away. Where it does sit in the middle of a yellow chip, it just gives it some extra depth. But if you look at Borderlands vehicles, they tend to have chipping that's maybe just one colour, or it's chipping that's drawn on but there's no discernible difference. So it's kind of very subtle, and that's what I'm going for. I'm not doing my usual two colour technique. It's really weird, but when you see in a minute, I think it came out all right. Okay, so that's all the chipping now done, and I hope you can see it's kind of got that Borderlands-y feel. I'm really pleased with the way the light yellow came out. It's got that kind of slightly faded, not just painted on chipping look. It's just got a look of patchy yellowy areas, which is exactly what I was looking for. The whole idea of doing it on really thin and then going over some of the bits I painted with just water on the brush to smush it out, I think worked really well. And it wasn't the first time I tried that, so yeah, it came out exactly like I wanted. So happy times. Now you notice I put the microphone back on again now, because I don't mind doing the filming and then doing a voiceover later, but I'd much rather just film and talk to you guys as I'm going along. It's more personal. But apart from that, there's another reason I wanted to put the microphone back on, and that is because we're going to try contrast paints. Now I've done a couple of figures in the shop, but I've not actually used contrast paints in anger yet properly on a build, and I'm not going to use them, well, I'm probably not going to use them on the Sazabi, but I don't know yet. But this is the first time I'm going to try them for reals. Now if you remember, I covered all this in the relevant primer, which was Grey Seer, and that's a contrast primer. It's designed to work with the contrast paints. Now if you remember as well, look at the vehicles in Borderlands. They don't have shiny metals, they have greys, and we're going to try and use the contrast paints and some shades to build up these to look like Borderlands-style metallics. So I'm going to start off with the Space Wolves Grey. Now I've got two. I have Space Wolves Grey and I have Griff Charger Grey, and I've done a quick test and they come out slightly different. On the same primer here, Griff Charger Grey comes out this sort of greeny grey colour, and Space Wolves comes out this bluey grey, so you can get a nice bit of variation just from the two. And we'll probably use both anyway, but let's start off first of all with Space Wolves Grey. Also, one other little handy tip: if you're doing a vehicle, yeah, if you notice all this paint that's rubbing off, welcome to the world of water-based acrylic paints. They're not very durable, and as you're handling a model to paint it, paint will come off. Now I'm not bothered about the tyres yet, because we're going to leave the tyres till we've finished everything else and mounted it on the base, and they'll be painted and weathered at the very end. But you will find paint comes off, so if you want to avoid that happening and having to touch stuff up, all I've done is I've drilled a hole in the bottom of the model, and if you've ever looked at one of these Citadel painting handles, you'll notice you can take this bit off. Now whether it's deliberate or not, it doesn't matter. That is perfect, because you can drill a hole in the bottom of your model and just screw that in, and it'll thread into the bottom of your model. So if you're building a tank or a car or anything like that, where you want to be able to handle it but not take all the paint off, and to be able to get underneath it, it's a really handy idea. Literally drill a hole, screw it in. So there you go. So anyway, let's crack on. So we're going to use the Space Wolves Grey. Now the trick with the contrast paints is you kind of apply them like shades. So I shall need my dad's device to hold this in. The trick is to apply them, well, I mean, you don't have to, but for the best effect, you apply them a bit like a shade. You basically pile them on, and like a shade, it will go into the recesses, but unlike a shade, it's have more of a staining property on the paint, on the primer area, on the flat areas where there's no recess. So you could go in with a little brush and be dead delicate, but we don't want to do that. We quite literally want to get a load on the brush, and we just want to do, what do we want to do, Ted?
Slap it on.
Exactly. Slap it on. Now, I'm probably going to do more than one coat, but I'm not being delicate. I'm not being afraid. I'm just getting it on there. Now, as I say, we can use, and I will be using, shades and things on here as well. But for the moment, we're just going to go in with the greys, the contrast paints, just to get the base colours down. So I'll get all this done. I'll come back in a second when that's been done. We've got to do all the frame around the edge and all the undercarriage and the weapons as well. So I shall see you in a minute when this has all been done. And I say, don't be careful with it, just get it on there.
Slap it on.
Exactly, Ted. Slap it on. And there you have it. That's what it looks like after one slapdash applied coat. Now there's a lot more to do. That's just the first initial coat. We might do some more contrast paints, we might do some shades, but we're going to do that in the next episode. We're going to leave it there today. You can see how it comes out. That's just one quick coat. We'll see what happens in the next episode. Next time, we'll crack on with that. We'll get all the weathering done, and we'll hopefully get the outlining done, and we'll see if this actually works. If I can pull this off and it works, I'll be using this colour scheme on the Sazabi. If it doesn't and it all goes to pot, then I won't use this idea on the Sazabi. And when I say this idea, I mean the outlining that we haven't done yet. That's the main thing. It's the main thing that I'm going to be testing on this not as expensive as a Sazabi kit. But that's going to do us for today, so thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you'd like to help support this channel, there's a few ways you can. First and foremost, get yourself to Goblin Games, follow the link in the description, get yourself saving 20% off this kit, off all the equipment, this thing, all the paints I've used. You can save up to 20% off RRP if you order through that link below there, and I make a little bit of income off that as well, so you're really helping me out. Or if you'd like to just directly support this channel, you can do. You can pop to patreon.com/model making guru. That way you can directly help support this channel and keep me making content for you. Now, of course, do remember the Sazabi build is ongoing. I've taken a little sidestep to test this out. This next episode of this will come hopefully fairly soon, and then once we've done this and we've found out, we can go back to working on the Sazabi and get that done. So stay tuned for all that. But until next time, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Go make something awesome. Go be awesome. You there, be awesome. And I shall say, adios, amoebas. Yes.